All right, folks, why don't I kick us off and get going. So thank you all for coming today. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate you working us into your summer schedule. Hi, I'm Rick Brimacomb, and on behalf of the Network Connect, welcome to another session in our series of reverse elevator pitches. Tonight you're going to hear from a panel of investors and entrepreneurs who have a history of evaluating business opportunities and growing businesses, and we'll be learning about their individual criteria for assessing investments. Dick Summerstead had the original idea for the Network Connect, and he started working on this concept in 2011. I joined forces with Dick about 2 years later, and the current iteration of the Network Connect we've been doing now together for about 4 years. The concept was taking the idea of creating a platform, an electronic platform for connecting investors, business ideas, service providers, and being kind of a catalytic gateway for helping companies and entrepreneurs grow and fuel their businesses. Our events and contacts have helped companies raise over $4.5 million, and our monthly newsletters now reach about 35,000 different business contacts, and we have about 15,000 angel investors or folks connected with funds. So a broad group of business contacts as well as a network of investors as well. Before we get to today's panel, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. University of St. Thomas has been hosting our events now for a couple of years. Sounds like we might be going to the Minneapolis Club for future events like this, so be on the lookout to make sure you know which location we're in. We've been doing a bunch of events at the Minneapolis Club as well. Olson Thielen CPAs is a full-service accounting and consulting firm. Mike Bromelkamp was here, and just when, oh, he's hiding in the back. I was just going to say, just when it's his time to get the spotlight, I didn't see him. Mike, yeah, talk now, yeah. Raise your hand one more time. So Mike and Olson Thielen have been a long-term sponsor of the Network Connect, and then they also have been sponsoring one of the other things I do, Club Entrepreneur, since 2009. So I'm very grateful to Mike and Olson Thielen and the work that they've done with me as well as with you all in the local business community. Schwegman Lumberg Woosner is an intellectual property law firm working on both the kind of hard side of IP business, the patents, as well as the soft side, trademark, copyright stuff. G&A Partners, anybody from G&A here tonight? Nobody from G&A, but G&A is a human resources, benefits, payroll, and outsourcing firm serving small and mid-sized companies. The Clean Tech Open has also been a long-term sponsor of the Network Connect, and anybody who is going through the process of trying to launch a clean tech-oriented business. Clean Tech Open is a fabulous place to get connected up with. And while they're not a sponsor, a little plug for the Minnesota Cup. I know some folks are involved with the Minnesota Cup, also a great resource for folks trying to grow their business. And then Mojo Minnesota. Mojo is another organization I'm involved in, kind of a initiative to promote entrepreneurship, innovation, job creation, and so forth here in Minnesota. And without the generous support of those sponsors, events like this wouldn't happen. So to the extent you can, please support them. In terms of being connected with the Network Connect, the website is thenetworkconnect.com. You can sign up there for an email list and get connected up with the various events we have going on, as well as find, again, money, jobs, service providers, etc. All right, so with that, let's go to our panelists. I've had an opportunity to interact over the years with all three of them, going from Andrew and I, who met just a couple of months ago, to Marc Kermisch and I, who we met almost 20 years ago. Scary, but Mark and I did meet almost 20 years ago, and then Pam and I have known each other for a couple of years, and I've had a chance to interact with all three of these folks, and you're in for a wonderful opportunity to interact with them and hear from them. So I'll just give a little bit of background, and then I'll let them fill in some color. To my immediate right, Andrew Murphy is managing partner at Loup Ventures. Loup Ventures is a research-driven early-stage venture capital firm investing in virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and robotics. Prior to co-founding Loup Ventures, Andrew was in industry where he held various marketing positions at Ecolab. And the way to Loup Ventures, though, was through 5.5 years of doing investment research at Piper Jaffray, where he met and worked with his fellow Loup co-founders. Marc Kermisch in the middle there is VP and Chief Information Officer at Red Wing Shoes. Marc is a technology leader with over 16 years of experience in bringing an entrepreneurial approach to software development, IT operations, program and project delivery, and product management. Prior to joining Red Wing Shoes, Marc held a senior technology positions at Xcel Energy, Target, and the Hartford. As I mentioned, Marc and I met about 20 years ago in the late 90s when he was at a venture-backed startup that Sherpa Partners was involved in. At the time, I was doing Sherpa Partners, and we've just stayed in touch over the years. And Marc is now an investor and advisor to early-stage companies for his own account and just kind of doing his own thing. So Andrew here representing Loup Ventures, Marc Kermisch here representing himself and the angel investor community at large, and then Pam York is a general partner at Capita 3. Pam is an investor, entrepreneur, and advisor with leadership and operational experience in both startups as well as corporations. She began her career inventing lasers for optical networking, and upon discovering her passion for business, she transitioned to building companies. So she has both the investment experience as well as the operational experience, and her most recent endeavor, Capita 3, is a growth financing company aimed at early-stage businesses founded and led by women. So we kind of have an interesting mix here. Pam has her investment group focused on women-owned and led businesses. Marc kind of coming at things from the perspective of an angel investor, and then Andrew at Loup Ventures looking at things from the venture capital perspective, and with a heavy emphasis on technology. So with that as kind of a quick bio on everybody, why don't we just spend a little bit of time and you kind of fill in the cracks a little bit and give a little bit more information on your personal bio. And let's start with you, Andrew.
Cool, thanks. And thanks, Rick, for all that you do to bring together the community, like all the networking and connections that you make.
Yeah, thank you.
So Loup Ventures is brand new to the venture world. And it's a team that has been working together for 10 years. As Rick mentioned, we all started at Piper Jaffray covering technology companies and writing investment research for mostly on Apple, but other technology companies like Netflix, Adobe, Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, throughout the years. So we've seen sort of themes emerge or waves of technology emerge through the internet and mobile, and we see another wave coming and wanted to create a venture fund to capitalize on that in a different way than we did as analysts at Piper. So in January, Loup Ventures started. We're here in Minneapolis. We're doing three things right now. Raising a $20 million fund and making a good bit of progress on that. But I know for those of you in the group that are raising money, I know what that's like. And I think our paths and our lives might be more similar than you think. Then we're also investing. So out of half the fund, which we've closed, and our own general partner commitment, we're deploying capital. And then the third thing we're doing is writing research. And Rick mentioned that we're research-driven, partly because of what we have always done at Piper and kind of the way we work, the way we analyze investments. We're continuing to write research on the themes that we're pursuing. So that's a bit about Loup Ventures. I kind of wove in there that the team, the three of us that started Loup, have known each other through Piper, and we were writing research on tech investment opportunities there. So we still do that today, and wanted to build this as a way to work together and continue to work together for a long time. So Gene Munster, Doug Clinton, and I are doing the Loup Ventures thing and having a ton of fun so far, but we're new to the game, and so we're learning. A lot of what I'll share today is just our learning process and kind of what we've put together so far, and it's sort of an evolving process for us and the investment strategy that we have. So
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Mark.
Thank you, Rick, and also thank you for everything you've done. I think you and I have probably seen the peaks and valleys of the
Absolutely.
startup community around Minnesota and the Midwest, as well as the financing community. As Rick mentioned, I started my career in startups, launched my own, worked for 3 of them, and unfortunately, at some point, it really dried up coming out of the first internet bubble, which landed me in corporate America, of all things. And then I spent the last really 15, 16 years focused on typically building startup entities within a corporate structure or driving massive change to adopt to emerging business models within a corporate structure. And then about 3-4 years ago, got to the point where I was trying to figure out how best to give back to the startup community that I often loved. Would have loved to gone back and worked in the startup community and may still do that in the future. And really 2 things emerged, and I think really Rick sets the path for a lot of this, is being able to invest my own money within the community itself, as well as leverage my network to help companies make those connections so they can get to their next level. Probably since the last time I was involved in something like this, Red Wing also has launched an internal incubation innovation group that there's about 5 of us that run. And so now all of a sudden I've been thrust back into that role of how do we actually make investments and or partner in the startup community to help drive the next set of innovations for Red Wing. And so now mainly we're doing that as buyers of services or products that some of you may be creating.
Great. Thanks. Pam.
So I actually started a long ways from where I am right now. I have my PhD in electrical engineering, and as Rick said, I discovered that I had a real passion for business, but I just wanted to say for those of you who have a technical background or if you haven't been a startup CEO, you know, really you can carve your path. It's just really a matter of getting focused on what you want, and I knew that I wanted to be involved in startups, and I have been, you know, for a very long time. And actually, I got my exposure after my PhD, I was working at a $100 million technology development company. And when I got there, we changed our business model from contract research to incubating teams and technologies and spinning out companies. And we spun out 21 companies in 7 years, which was just an incredible experience. And I was a founder in 2 of those companies. The first one was called Orchid Cellmark. It was tools for drug discovery. My role was to lead a large technical team to produce the technical milestones that were required to raise successive rounds of financing. And the company went on and had a very successful IPO and then was acquired by LabCorp. And then my second company was called Princeton Lightwave, Lasers for the Fiber Optic Network, which harkens back to my PhD work. And my role there was, you know, business model, pitch development, fundraising, and sales. And my team and I raised about $50 million from Sand Hill Road investors, venture capitalists. But we were building our company when the telecom market was crashing. And so the company, it's still ongoing, actually, amazingly enough. It's a private, profitable company, but it never produced a return for investors. So it's really very valuable as an entrepreneur to have both of those experiences of, you know, a great success and also not such a great success. I learned a lot in that process. I've done a lot of other things in my career. Technology commercialization's always been at the heart of what I've been doing. I've been an individual investor for a long time, mostly investing in, you know, high-tech venture capital, you know, high-tech companies. And I've also helped form about 5 different venture funds here in the Midwest, either as an informal advisor or as an investor in the fund itself. So I'm here on behalf of myself, my own investing as an angel investor, and as Rick mentioned, Capita 3, which is a brand new forming entity to invest in companies founded and led by women.
Why don't maybe we just stay down there and
Sure.
tell us a little bit more about Capita 3, how it works, who's in it. Also, I know you're in the Sophia Fund and some of the
Yes.
other things, so maybe just a little bit on the kind of investment background and so forth.
Sure. So Capita 3, our vision is to be a global financing institution, investing in the entire life cycle of women-led businesses from formation to exit. We're starting with an early-stage venture fund that's U.S.-based with an emphasis on the Midwest, but we do have a plan to move beyond to later stages. My co-founder is Sarah Russick. Many of you know the Go for Angels, so she's co-founder, managing director of, it's a managed angel investor network, which has invested, I think it's like $12 million in 32 companies so far. So very active early stage investor here. Before that, she was a serial entrepreneur. She built 2 companies from scratch and exited those companies. So some of our advisors, some of you may know Thomas McNerney Partners, Kathy Toon, very experienced VC, is one of our advisors, and then Errol Arkalik, who is a San Francisco venture capitalist, and he formed a fund called M34 Capital with Steve Blank, whom some of you may know as the father of the Lean Startup movement. So we've got a really great team of people, as well as industry advisors. We've just launched our fundraise this summer, so it's very early for us. But and so for those of you raising money, as Andrew said, we really appreciate what you're going through. It's just like being an entrepreneur raising money for a company. But once we raise our fund, we'll be investing in companies founded and led by women at the seed and Series A stages, and then selected follow-on investments in those companies. And did you want me to mention, you said something about investment history or?
Just giving you the microphone to say whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, again, all of my personal investing has been at these early stages, as well as, my investment in the Sophia Fund, which invests at early stages. So that's really our skill set and our expertise, is helping companies really move from the early stages, into growth stages and beyond.
Great, thanks. Marc, talk a little bit about your investment background, and given that you're making your own investments, maybe kind of talk a little bit from that lens, and then at some point in time in our conversation today, we do have to talk a little bit about luck and timing, because when we first met, the business that you were at were playing by the rules of the day and had filed to go public, and another day, week, month, and you all get public, and you raise 2 weeks and raise the money. So anyway, it doesn't have to be at this conversation, but I just want to put it out there at some point.
Yeah.
Weave in that part of your story at some point tonight. But anyway, again, talk about your investment background and kind of how you look at things from your perspective.
So I think what Rick's referencing is back, for those that maybe were here back then, there's a company called Techies.com, which was a startup in the HR space, competed with Monster.com, Dice.com, which is still surviving, but ultimately raised $100 million over that course of that time. And we were 2 weeks out from going public, and the market shut down. And that led the company to do some bridge financing, eventually delist, and ultimately hit bankruptcy as the whole .com boom busted the first time around. Seeing that from the inside, I really learned about venture capital and investment and startup financing through that experience being an operator. And so it kind of taught me, what those institutional investors look for. And so when I got to the point in my career where I had means to give back from a financial perspective to startups like yourselves, it gave me the sense of what to look for. And first and foremost for me is, who's the founder, right? Why are they doing it? What's their passion? How committed are they to their business? Are they all in? Is it a side venture? Being an independent angel investor that has never, been born through a massive win as a startup company, I have very limited funds to distribute. And so where I play is typically very early stage as a group of other angel investors. So typically you're sub $1 million or $1 million mark when you're hitting those first stages of investment. My exit strategy is typically to sell back shares in your pre-Series A or Series A. So that investor itself or that startup itself can retain some equity redistribution versus diluting. And as a small investor, I'd eventually get diluted out anyway, right? Especially if you started to see major success. But ultimately, you know, for me, it starts with the individual and the team, which I don't think is uncommon across the venture capital space. And then from there, it starts to look at the market, right? You know, what I don't typically ask is, you know, give me the pitch of your whole market. I don't know if I care if you're in a $400 billion market. What I care is what's the niche you're going after and how are you going to get to profitability fast, and even better if you're already doing it. You know, luckily for me, I've had some of my own personal network that have gone out and launched companies, and that's where my first investments went. You know, my first one was in educational technology, and the second one was in a data analytics platform. Both started by folks that I had exposure to in the past. I'd say the harder, and I'd be curious on my other panelists, the harder one is receiving an unsolicited investment from somebody I don't know, right? Hey, I'd like to learn about my company. If I don't have somebody I can vet you against within my network, it makes it harder for me to feel comfortable to part with my cash.
I can kind of piggyback on that because in the last 6 months, we've met with hundreds of startups, and we've looked at the metrics of the sources of the leads on the investment opportunities. And I'll tell you a little bit about the background and the strategy, but the numbers are 60% are from our own network. And those are always the strongest investment opportunities we look at. 20% have been inbound because we've got sort of this research-driven strategy that's out in the media. It's pretty loud, louder than most venture firms would be. And so it's easy to find us and easy to know what we're investing in. But we haven't done an investment in a company that came inbound to us, like you're saying, unsolicited. The last 20% is what we call the scour method, and that's where we identify the type of company we're looking for, certain specs, parameters, and then we scour the web for that type of a company, and that's been somewhat successful. But the network is key, and I think each of us have already mentioned both on the investor side as part of our own story and in terms of what we're looking for in investments. The team is where it starts and ends, with a lot of other due diligence criteria in between. But the question was around investment background, and the three of us that founded this venture firm have been working together for 10 years analyzing tech investments. We've been doing it in the public markets, so venture is new to us. But I think that I said before, the three of us built this as a way to work together because we love working together. That's the cornerstone of the whole deal. And that's what we look for in the teams that we invest in, is teams that work well together, teams that share a vision, share our values. That's, I guess, our investment thesis is informed by our investment background as a team. And like I said, our vision of the future and the values that we have as a team that we share.
Great. Let's talk a little bit, dive a little deeper into the investment criteria. So if you lead with team, and it's interesting, your perspective, given how you and your two co-founders work together and kind of put the band back together with Loup Ventures. Talk about some of the other things that are important to your group. So team number one, but after that, what are some of the other items?
The end of the due diligence process is a list of 16 questions that we go through as an investment committee on any investment opportunity that reaches there. 9 of them are about the founding team or the founder herself, himself. And I think that that's reflective of also, if something's going to go wrong, 9 times out of 16, it's going to be about a person, an interpersonal thing, a team thing, a moral thing, less about the market or the product or the specs on the investment. So we really do focus on the team. But you're going to hear that from all of us, and we can talk more about it if you want. The other questions surround the market itself. So that's why we do a lot of research on the themes that we are investing in, so that we have a good understanding of the markets that these companies are playing in. So we oftentimes come to the table with a pretty good understanding of the market, but want to learn more about criteria number 3, or the next bunch of questions would be about the product. And that is the product offering and where that fits in the current, I would say, the current movement of where the market, where consumers are going, and how the specific idea that is, unique to this founder fits in that market. So you've got, like you guys were talking about, timing and luck. We're looking for good timing and good luck for a uniquely positioned founder, and that's a tough one for entrepreneurs to hear, because you are who you are, and it is what it is. The timing is today. We have a little bit of luck, or we're lucky to be able to be picky in terms of who we invest in and when. So that product market fit is the third chunk, and then the fourth group of questions is more around like investment analysis of the deal itself, the financing round that's being raised, and we target to participate in rounds where a startup is raising, call it about $1 million. It's typically called a seed round, sometimes Series A, and we'll participate at $300,000 to $500,000 level. One question we look at is, can this investment return the fund? And I said we've got a $20 million fund. Can this $300,000, $500,000 check that we're writing turn into $20 million? And so we're looking for what I'd call grand slams, not just home runs, not doubles and triples. Our strategy is kind of all in higher risk, higher reward investments.
Great, thanks. Mark, you mentioned earlier team and market, kind of your top 2 things you look at. What would be 3, 4, 5?
Yeah. So I'll go into that, and then I'll maybe close with a little bit more about, I think, the core difference between when an angel investor like myself and maybe, I think, early stage seed funds that both Pamela and Andrew are working on. So team is number 1, and for me, I look at folks that are, when I say all in, they've left their job, they're putting their own money in it, they're putting their own sweat equity into it, and their risk is high, right? Or I'm looking for a team that's failed once before, maybe twice before. They know what it means to actually go through this once, and I'm not having to think about going on that same roller coaster journey with them as their first one. They're not cutting their teeth on me, and I find that they tend to be a little bit more laser focused, and they understand what they have to do. To me, when I look at market, I want a market that's fractured or a market that hasn't been disturbed. So the first investment I made in was around scholarship fund management. I mean, talk about really unsexy. But there's like 3 big players, and there's corporations here in the cities like Cargill and Medtronic and General Mills, Target, United Health Group. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars they're putting into education through scholarships. And so this individual created an interesting way to tackle that, and driving sticky engagement down at the primary education level to carry that student all the way through postgraduate. So that was a really intriguing market for me. I look at intellectual property. So is there intellectual property that you may be able to create? So when I think about high-tech startups, they're often able to create defensive positions because they can patent something. Or I look for an area where, hey, I'm going after this, and I have to navigate very carefully because I don't want to infringe on somebody's patent. That's frankly Red Wing's business. We're constantly navigating, is somebody got a patent on this shoe technology? How can I make money in between the patents? Essentially creating a new marketplace for me, or certainly lowering my cost. I also look for, for investments where there might be a lot of regulatory environment they have to navigate through. It can be good and bad. It might be a turnoff. If they're super broad and there's a lot of regulations for them to fight through. Healthcare, I don't know a lot about. I'd be very nervous as an angel investor there. However, if you're going into, oil and gas, where there's interesting environmental regulations, international regulations, OSHA requirements, and you have a way to solve for that, it might be very interesting to me. And lastly is location. And I think part of that is because we're in the Midwest. Is the location is it a competitive advantage or a detriment for the team? And how flexible are they if they really hit it to move or relocate? Or can they navigate a team that's dispersed across the country? How big and broad are they willing to go with that?
Great, thanks. Pam?
So we are really interested in investing into what we call white spaces, places where there's really significant opportunity, but they're sort of emerging markets. So we're broadly focused on health. We think that there's been a lot of talk about health and healthcare, but we think we truly are on a cusp of really a new way of thinking about our health. And so we want to invest in things that either make it simpler or provide more natural solutions for healing and for health. So one example would be a local company called Oculogica. I don't know if any of you have heard of this company, but basically what they can do is they can tell if you have a concussion and where it's located in your brain and the severity of it in 200 seconds, simply by tracking your eye movements. I mean, it's just a phenomenal company led by two sisters. And so that's an example of a company. I mean, they're going to transform the way concussions are, diagnosed and treated, and there's a massive market for that. We also really like companies that have both a B2C and B2B channel in healthcare. I think that's really important. So a great example of that would be there's a local company called Step One Foods. Has anybody heard of them? They've been in the news recently, but they've made food that replaces statins for people who are intolerant or don't want to take a drug to manage their cholesterol. And they're in clinical trials right now with Mayo with really, really fantastic results. So they're selling direct to consumers, but they also have a reimbursable channel, which makes the company incredibly valuable and has a lot of potential. So those things are really, really super interesting to us. In addition to all the things that they said as well, how many people here know what product market fit means? Can you raise your hand if you know what that means? Essentially, it just means that you validated your product with your customer. Really says, yes, you know who your customer is, you validated that with them, and you actually have evidence of that by sales, whether it's an initial early channel or larger channel. So, of course, product market fit's very, very important to us. We want a very clear problem statement and solution. It's easy to run into companies that there's a lot of complexity, and we want it to be very clear so that we understand what we're investing in and that the core team is in place to actually, if we're going to put money into you, we want the team to be there. And that doesn't mean you necessarily don't have all your team members, but the core team is there to really execute on what's being financed. And then lastly, one of the things that we're doing that we think really makes us differentiated is that because we're both entrepreneurs, we built companies, and also I personally have 15 years of experience in transformational leadership programs where it's really all about learning how to grow yourself in order to produce a particular result. We're bringing that into our companies because we think that what we'd really like entrepreneurs, you can look at someone else talking about their company and you can see that they're not seeing something, or they're not seeing a bigger opportunity, or they're not understanding that maybe they're not suited to do what they're doing. And so we want entrepreneurs to be able to see that for themselves and then make that shift in themselves and their company. So we've developed programming to do that, and we'll be working with our entrepreneurs with the companies that we finance, and we think that that will make a big difference in our overall success.
Great, thank you. So everybody here invests in early stage companies. Just to reiterate with the audience, let's go through and just remind everyone the specific industries that you're looking for so that if somebody decides to reach out to you, that they're reaching out to the right person. So just talk just a little bit about the specific industries that you're most interested in. Any order?
Broadly, our space is known as frontier technology. We've identified artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, and augmented reality as 4 themes that we're going after. It's part branding for our fund and messaging, but also part guardrails for the investment mandate.
For me, I'd say it comes based off the industries I know, as well as the types of technologies I'd buy as a CIO, which can be relatively broad. But anything retail driven, and I look for mainly areas that would be servicing the back office operations, not necessarily the consumer interactions at retail. From a manufacturing perspective, a lot of what I'm looking at is around productivity management, which usually leads to data platforms, data analysis, artificial intelligence, in those spaces. Financial technologies, with my background in the finance space. I have a weird infatuation with startups that are tackling utility and public energy consumption. I think the trend of electric cars and limited resources we have naturally are going to really change how power consumption happens in our economies of scale. And I look in those areas as well. And then, like I said, lastly, it'd be anything that really services the back office operations from a technology. It could be data platform management, continuous development delivery tool sets, cloud-based services that replace corporate systems at lower cost of operations for companies. So these are all things as a CIO I would buy and just have a lot of familiarity with.
So as I said, we're very broadly health. I mean, there's a lot of things that we would consider. Things that are firing on all cylinders for us are things like food as medicine. We love that space. I think that's a really fantastic opportunity. And then a new area called Femtech, which has a lot to do with women's health. It's women's healthcare services, and then also selected fields in healthcare IT, whatnot, as well as biotech. Really, in biotech, it would be more services-based. Right now I'm chair of a startup company here locally called Core Biome, which is genomic services, profiling the microbiome, which is kind of, they call it the new blood in terms of discovering new therapeutics to really help people heal. So things that are services-based that really help companies understand how to bring new products and services to market.
Great, thank you. So I have a list of questions. I'm going to keep going down this list and just peppering them with things. But if somebody has any questions, specific questions, please raise your hand and I'll weave you into the conversation. So don't be shy. Raise your hand if you have any questions. Oh, we got one right in front. How about that?
So we're talking about investing here. Have you guys done any deals with licensing or taken a cut of that to help the venture do a license deal?
So the question, if you couldn't hear it over here, is licensing. Have they done any licensing deals? And then I'm guessing your thought process is, as the inventor, founder, you can, in essence, raise money by doing a licensing deal and either go to the next one or take that in essence as investment capital. So licensing and...
So I mean, yes, I have a long background in technology commercialization and licensing. So, I mean, not knowing what you have, I mean, do you have a company or do you have a technology that you want to license?
Company with tech.
Okay, and you can, yeah, I mean, certainly there are companies that can have licensing models of, with technology, depending on what it is. So we could talk about that afterwards if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I've done, depending on how broad your definition of licensing is, as a corporate buyer of technology, we've actually invested in smaller or early stage startups through licensing deals or earn backs on future revenues. So we might make an investment of, let's say, $1 million, but I'm going to tax your revenues until I recoup 1.5 times that.
And at Loop, we have not done that type of investment. I did an angel investment that has turned into an agreement like that. Because things got rocky, and there's a new owner, new sheriff in town. But no, not at Loop.
Okay. All right. So let's say we're out in the hall either before or after this session. Somebody comes up to you and they give you their little elevator pitch that they've practiced and honed and ran it by people and all that kind of stuff. What would you hear in that little elevator pitch that would say, ooh, I want to learn more? And the flip side of that is, what might you hear like, this person just didn't position it right from my perspective. So what's kind of like, what captures your attention and what might turn you off to whatever it is they're trying to tell you?
For me, I mean, the first thing I want to see is that the person is really aware and present. I mean, are they really listening to me? Are they looking at me and seeing if I'm connecting with what they're doing? Because if they're not, then I'm just getting a spiel, right? And awareness is a huge factor in the overall success of entrepreneurs. So that's the first thing that I look for. And then I want to hear, here's this big problem. And I want to see people being passionate and excited about it. Here's this big problem, and here's the solution I have. And more or less, here's how we can, maybe not specifically how we can make money, but it needs to be clear that there's a big problem, you know how to solve it, and you're really getting traction on that. That's kind of what I look for. And then if you can usually, it's not easy, but if you do that in 30 seconds to a minute, you can find out if anybody's interested in hearing more, and then you can tell more if they are interested.
Tough to add to that. I would emphasize, though, when you're given the opportunity to pitch a potential investor on an elevator, the temptation is to try and spit it all out and get in all your good points, and I think you miss the opportunity to hear what they're interested in. And so asking more questions than making points seems to resonate, because it shows like an emotional intelligence or awareness that you're mentioning that really resonates with me, I guess, personally. That's helpful.
Great, thanks, Mark.
I'd echo both what Andrew and Pamela said. If you're not paying attention to who your investor is and you don't realize that they have no interest in your market space, you're wasting both your time and their time. And I think too many startups and folks raising capital, they take the shotgun approach. I think you should be very laser focused on knowing as much about the investor you're talking to and understanding what's the network effect of that investor. So when I look at the investments I want to put money into, I come at it a little bit differently, because I'm not necessarily looking for the same financial return that I think Andrew and Pamela are. I'm kind of looking at what does this investment get me besides a potential financial return? Who am I going to be introduced to in regards to your broader network or the other investors participating that might lead to other goals that I have as that investor? What turns me off on the flip side, is somebody who immediately launches in with making the assumption that I'm interested in their space, and they lead with, well, let me tell you about my market opportunity. I don't want to know about your market opportunity. I'd much rather know about you. And if you lead with, hey, I've got this great idea to tackle this $400 billion market, I'm like, I don't know you, right? So why don't you start with who you are, what's your background, and like, why are you even being an entrepreneur? Because it's got to be one of the hardest paths in life to plow.
If I could add to that, Rick, because I'm always very driven in my conversations. I always want to produce a result, and so I, like lots of entrepreneurs, had to learn that, it's really, it just doesn't work to walk up to somebody and just give them, your pitch. That seldom works, actually, unless it's actually a pitch, for that purpose. It's, it's like you wouldn't walk up to a family member, right, that you haven't seen for 2 years and pitch them. It's about developing a relationship and really just connecting with that person. And if you connect on a really personal level, then that creates an opening to, hey, would you be interested in hearing about my company or whatever? Something that leads to a conversation that then allows you to talk about it. And if they're not interested, they're not, but you still made a connection, and that's important.
So we've heard several different ways about that, folks maybe not being in tune to who they're talking to and making that connection. Is there kind of more a hard as opposed to soft mistake that they make that often gets in the way of you engaging with either what they're trying to accomplish or their plan or whatever? So for me, it always drives me crazy when someone says it's a X billion-dollar industry and I only need 1% to get hundreds of millions. So that's one that I just have a thing about. Are there other kind of, I call them deal killers, that you kind of, again, either shut them down or shut down in terms of listening once they have gone into that space?
One little one for us is, if we ask a question, we want a crisp, succinct answer. And oftentimes, answers will ramble on and on and on, and you've lost the time for the rest of the conversation.
And they don't not even necessarily answer that
Right,
question,
right.
and then try to cover it up by their answer. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Mark, Pam, any deal killers that jump out at you?
So I think a red flag for me is when they're very quick to offer board seat, advisor. I want you to be my advisor. Kind of put your name on my website. If I don't even know them, right? To me, it shows a level of desperation potentially, or just lack of maturity of how to go through the process. And a lot of times, it's like, hey, Mark, I'd love to have you be an advisor to my company. I'm like, that's great, but again, it's like asking for money, not telling me who you are. And a lot of times, it's if you haven't dated me first, so to speak, you know, you don't know what value I bring, and that's an ask of time for me. And I've often seen that folks in those situations are so far away from refining their idea that it's really not the right time to work with me.
I would say the number one thing, in addition to what we've already said, that really would be an absolute deal killer for me is if I sense the person just isn't operating from integrity. You know, I mean, so it's so much better to be honest and sort of naive or not being able to answer all the questions and being honest about that than it is to try to make up something or pretend like you know somebody, whatever, name dropping and stuff like that. It's the whole process of building a company requires you to be so humble and open and grow that if you can't do that in a conversation, you probably can't do that in your company.
Good point. So Pam and Andrew are out raising money right now, and earlier in his career, Mark had to worry about that. For the folks out in the audience that are out raising money, what would be the couple of recommendations or things that you would say to them?
I would say we've done our pitch to potential investors over 100 times, and we're just now kind of getting in the groove of it. And it feels like the best pitches we do, we don't open the deck, right? We've got the thing down cold. It's there on the desk. We use it to answer questions that often come up. But again, it starts with us asking questions about the potential investor. And usually, you know, we're able to weave in the important points, but more than anything, we're trying to address and assess what they're interested in. That would be the advice, I guess,
Okay.
go in with listening.
Mark?
I so appreciate that Andrew's pitched 100 times because we haven't, which is why I have my talking points in front of me. I mean, it really is amazing. Even though I've raised a lot of money, I've worked with a lot of people to raise money, it's amazing how much time it takes to really get ready. And so that's one thing. And also, we've been in front of a fraction of the people that Andrew has, but what's so interesting is that when we went through the deck and pitched, you know, to one person we got a no, and then to like 8 or 10 other people we just had a conversation and got a yes. Yes, I absolutely, you know, so it's so different than what you think. It really is. So much of it is about really listening and finding the right people. And I think entrepreneurs think you just go talk to everybody you can about your company. It just isn't the case. You need to really understand, what do I need and who's out there that might be interested in that, and really trying to find a match. I mean, I hate to use the dating and a marriage analogy, but it is kind of like that. You need to find people that are really interested and match what you have to offer.
And I think for me, and this probably comes a bit from my techies days, know when to move on. You know, I think and I'd be curious on Andrew and Pamela, but in my experience, most venture capitalists, especially when you get into the institutional side, they don't want to say no because they always want to leave a door open, right? It's great if you get a hard no, because then you move on, you go to the next one. But it's like, you know, call me when you get your first round, or call me when you've got your second customer, or when you've hit 100,000 in revenues. A lot of times those are soft no's because they want to have an open door for you. But what I have found is you're not in their core market. If they thought that you were worth the investment, they'd go, right? And they'd want to be a part of your growth. If they're not sure, then, you know, go on and move on and just kind of put them way back in your burner. And they may come knocking on your door later versus you going back to them. But I don't know if that's similar experiences.
Yeah, I would add to that, because I think that it is not hard to know when someone's interested. They will let you know immediately. And when you're not getting that immediate feedback, it's probably a no, even if it takes a while.
Great, thanks. Yeah, right up here, Jeff.
So something that Andrew said about having a document and then not even using it, there was a great guy who wrote to me speaking about that for he's written a number of books on like Zen presentations.
Oh, yeah.
About naked, the naked presenter or something like this. And what he says is, write your presentation, but if you don't even have to show it to anybody, then you know your presentation is probably going to present it much better than you'll ever present it if you have it, if you look at it page by page. So
Yeah.
and he actually got that out of his work with Apple. He worked at Apple doing presentations. So that's exactly
Yeah.
there's data on that.
Yeah, good.
Thanks.
Good point. Have you received any advice over the years that has kind of stuck with you, that you've leaned on or recalled and used in your investment selection process? So did anybody give you anything that you've really held on to over the years?
So as an investor, especially as an angel investor, probably the best advice I ever got was don't bet your whole nut on one shot, right? Always have money in reserve for a follow-on round. So when I look at my investments as a small-time investor, I'm putting in very little money, usually so I can reserve to participate in the future, if I have that opportunity.
Great.
We got similar advice. I could put some numbers around it. So we're raising a $20 million fund. We'll actually invest only half of it in 35 initial investments and reserve the remaining half to follow on in subsequent rounds and ideally double down on our winners.
Yeah, same advice there. And also just that it's so easy to, when you see a great team and a great market and all these things are great, everything's going well, it's very easy to sort of want to jump in. But it's really important to go through the process that Andrew described because it's easy to see people under the best, when they're at their best, but the reason the process takes a long time is because you're really trying to see people under all different circumstances and how they react to difficult situations and just really taking the time to be disciplined about evaluating the team because it does take time to really to see all that.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd layer on there, and this was when I was as a startup trying to do a couple different times, is I want to look for a team that's willing to pivot and hear my feedback. And I can't think of many startups that I've either been in and around that haven't had some aspect of a pivot to their business model. And as an investor, I want to make sure that the startup I'm going into has that same mentality, knowing that where they're starting may not be their endpoint. And if you look at all the major companies out there today, they all had some aspect of a pivot. But I've run into a lot of entrepreneurs that are closed-minded about it. They're so passionate about their idea and they think they are so right that they close themselves off too early to that opportunity, and they're going to have to experience the failure. That's why I like teams that have failed before they open up to that opportunity.
I think that's probably why Pam and I both said that we're looking for somebody that's a good listener, because it's indicative of somebody that can take feedback and adapt. And you're just talking about that on the company level, when you could take feedback from customers and adapt your product offering accordingly. That's ultimately just listening to your customer.
Beth, do you have any questions? No? All right. So I know Susan's just wrapped up her stuff for the Minnesota Cup. Lengthy business plan, lengthy executive summary, a video, deep financials, there's all this stuff. So the question is, how important is that really? And how close do you really look at it or scrutinize it?
So I'm a judge for the food and ag division, and we typically have between 80 to 100, submissions. And my view is that information, the first thing is that I can literally scan them and tell which ones are really prepared and organized. And it's because if you really understand what you're doing, it just comes across in the document. So to me, those documents are really for you. They're really for you to understand, here's what I'm doing, and here's how I need to explain it. And then, of course, we're reading them and evaluating you based on that information. but it's really a tool for you to understand and convey what your business is. And if you do that, like we've said, eventually you don't even need the documents to do that.
And I would agree with you, and I would say for me personally, not that important, right? I think again, at the level I'm investing in, it's so early on. To me, I anchor back to who you are, what your story is, and the problem statement and solution you're bringing. Having a 30-page business case and a fully fledged marketing plan, your channel plan, your financials. Yes, I expect you to have done and had done some of that homework and have a conversation with me, but I don't want to spend the time reading 100 investments opportunities because I'm just a one-man guy, and the money I'm giving you isn't enough for you to go through that effort, frankly.
So I think I agree in spirit, almost like incredibly important, and I don't use them all that much. Incredibly important because, it's a chance, it's data points for me to see and look at and analyze. Is this person a clear communicator, a clear thinker? Do they understand their problem? Can they communicate the solution? Creative, there's all sorts of data points I can pick up from scanning the documents. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm doing. It's a pre-check, and oftentimes if somebody sends me a pitch deck, but then also sometimes it's after I've made an investment decision or just as I'm about to commit. It's checking boxes at that point. Then legal documents in place. We've got folders we need to fill up in our due diligence template to check boxes, essentially. So there's, both sides of it, but it's much more of a soft analysis of those documents.
Thanks. Talk a little bit about return expectations. Maybe start with you because you put that out there saying, hey, we want the opportunity anyway to earn the fund with one investment, which is different than, trying to hit singles, doubles, et cetera. So maybe just go down the road here and let's just talk about kind of specific return expectations, either individually or for your groups.
Yeah, so our expectation or hope for each individual investment is that it can return the fund, or at least we can foresee a scenario in which this company could be acquired or go public at a certain valuation that would return our $20 million fund from that single investment. And we're very upfront about that approach with our investors, and it's one strategy to go for grand slams, it's another to go for singles and doubles, and we're really clear about that. Not much more to add, I guess.
So a typical, your model was 300,000 trying to get to a $20 million fund, so 60 times.
Yeah, usually at the valuations that we're investing at, we're talking about company getting acquired or going public at somewhere between $250 million and $750 million. It's kind of the exit value that we'd be looking for.
All right, great.
Yeah, so I'm probably more in the singles and doubles, right? For me, because I'm coming in typically pre any institutional investment, so the way I'd look at it is the companies that I've participated in are trying to get to Andrew and Pam. Right, and the money I'm giving them helps them build their business cases, build out some, their product, test the product, get customer feedback, maybe sign that first contract. I'm looking for a 3x return on my money, with an ultimate goal to get to 10x. Right, so for me, it's I'm investing anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 is where I would look at, which is a lot different than 300,000 or $1 million. My ultimate goal would be able to get to a point where I have $1 million angel fund that's out of my own account that I can disperse on, and I would ultimately look to get to that would be something that gets me up to a 10x return. But I also put a 10-year horizon when I get to that level. Right now, I'm looking at 3-year horizons, mainly because it's getting that company to that first pre-Series A or Series A, and I'm exiting out of my 2 investments, one's a debt equity investment, so I have an option to convert, but I also can get paid out and earn interest back. So as a small-time angel investor, there's multiple ways for you guys to be thinking about that. Straight equity sometimes isn't the most attractive at this earliest of stages for me, for that perspective.
I mean, for me, it would be very similar as for Andrew. When you raise a venture fund, I mean, and you have institutional investors, you're obligated to have these return metrics that look something like at least 10 times cash-on-cash return. So whatever you put in has to deliver at least 10 times that, ideally the whole fund. So that's the model of venture capital.
I got more questions. I'll keep going. Nobody. Oh, we got one over here. Yes.
So one thing that was brought up earlier was taking your GM to the next level, not completely benchmark. Outside of the money and the pure financial return, what are other ways that we can help reducing that?
So I'll talk about it from 2 angles. One is the angel investor, and one is a company like Red Wing Shoes investing. So as an angel investor, other ways I look at is, what's the company you're keeping, and does that build my network and lead to other opportunities for me to participate in from an investment or an advisory perspective? That's the easiest way for me to get a return that has no financial component to it. Second would be learning about a particular industry that I have some experience in, but not deep knowledge in. So when I look at the space around scholarships, I knew nothing about scholarships. I put my money on the horse that's starting that business because I've known him for 15 years. And so it's an educational aspect for me of watching him grow a business in a space I don't know anything about. And then finally, is there a usability in my own personal and professional life of the product you're creating? And that'd be the third way. As a company, mainly I'm looking at the service you're providing, and is it something I can purchase as that and put it to use within the company that I'm working in today. So for Red Wing Shoes, we're spending a lot of time around the AR, VR, and AI space. And so an investment by us is most likely buying an early stage customer, because I want a workable, usable product with you. I may ask for the ability to participate in an equity round, mainly because I may want to participate as you grow or put you on my list as a future acquisition to block my competitors from that perspective.
Anybody want to chime in?
I would just say, I for whatever reason, I can only invest in things that I really believe in. I mean, that's part of why I do this. I mean, there's investors that simply invest for the purpose of making money, and they're not necessarily passionate about what they're investing in. We're strictly ROI, and that's our stated intention, but we also, where we get the greatest leverage and happiness and satisfaction about what we're doing is really investing in things that we know can make a huge difference in the world and that we really personally can get behind. So that's just very important to us.
I think the comment somebody made earlier about, I think it was you, Andrew, kind of we are where we are at this point in time. So you 3 are where you are at this point in time. If you kind of looked backward in your investment career with what you know now, what do you wish you would have known back then based on what you know now? That makes sense? What could you tell your earlier self that you're sitting here, hey, I've learned these things, school of hard knocks, got punched in the nose a couple of times, and gee, I wish 10 years ago I would have kind of had that under my belt so that I could have saved a few mistakes along the way.
I'll give you 2. One is not very friendly to our community. Early in my days, I would have gone where the market was. In my earliest of days, which would have meant leaving Minnesota. I think just because there's an accelerator effect when you're in your market that you really want to participate in. Being a little bit older and looking back, I would have focused on revenues. I would have focused on self-sustainment versus trying to have to go to investors early stage. It puts the ball back in your court from a negotiation perspective. If you've got revenues and you're able to make it without having to take institutional investment, more power to you. One of the companies I advise on, he's spent 11 years, he's got a $20 million e-commerce business. And he did it on his own. He's the sole owner of that business. All that revenue that comes through is his. Now that he wants to go to the next level, bringing money in is very different. But that was an 11-year journey where he didn't pay himself at all. He really lived just to cover his expenses. It's a very different journey. But I think if I had to give myself advice at 25 or 30, now that I'm much older than that, that's probably one of the things I would have shared.
Thank you.
I would definitely tell myself, never invest in something that you don't have the controls in place to produce what you know needs to happen, because you just, you think you have properly evaluated people and you know what they're going to do, and but as an investor, you need to have the controls in place via board mechanisms and whatnot, and the agreements in order to make sure that things happen. Even if it seems like they're going to happen, it needs to be in writing, and if you can't get them in writing, then that's a problem. So it's just a level of discipline that I've learned over the years that, things that you absolutely must have in place.
It sounds like there's a story there.
Maybe in a few years.
Or after some wine, one of the two.
I
Anyway.
stayed quiet because I'm early in my investor career, and I don't have the luxury of looking back and looking at mistakes. I will say, though, I've invested 10 plus years of my time in my career, and I've made some mistakes that I'm trying to learn from today, and I think they're applicable to anybody, and applicable as an investor as well. And the one that I feel like I've learned the easy way lately is to be who you are, and to design something or invest your time, your life in something that comes out of like the very deepest parts of who you are, what you're passionate about. When you do that, you'll do your best work and you'll be more successful. Even better than that, find a team that allows you to be who you are, and hopefully even complements who you are in ways that you're not. We at Loup feel like that's who we are, that's what we found, and we've kind of designed our strategy around that. Our skills and our roles and responsibilities are set up that way. And we look for teams that are similar, right? That's why I said in the beginning, we're looking for teams that share our vision of the future and share our values, because when we can kind of combine those two, we think that we're going to increase our likelihood of success.
All right, to wrap things up, everybody take, I don't know, a minute or two. Closing thoughts, last pearls of wisdom you want to share, anything to kind of tie it up in a nice bow?
I guess what I would say, this awareness theme is, big tonight, but it's one of the keys that I've found for myself in everything that I've done is my ability to see the reality of what's happening versus what I want to happen, and really respond appropriately is an absolute fundamental to success. And it's something that we can train ourselves to do, really, is to see the truth. This is especially true for startups where they may need to pivot, or they're not understanding something, or they're not performing. Really being able to see the reality of what's happening and be with that truth and respond appropriately is a huge skill set for an entrepreneur.
I think for me, and we've talked a lot about the team that I look to invest in. I also would encourage you guys to look at your investors as an extension of your team. Very, very thoughtful. I want to be active in the investments that I make. If you just want my money and me to go away, that's not for me. And so I really look at those organizations that I can benefit beyond the cash that I can give, but my experience, my network, et cetera. And it's always amazing to me how short there are connections, right? And there's several of you in the room that I've got very one-hop connections to. And that's important, I think, for you guys to really sit down and think. And we talked a little bit about being purposeful on approaching your investors. I think also being purposeful about the role you want. The bigger the company that the bigger your investment goes, those terms will be dictated to you going forward, kind of per the written agreements that you referenced. Early on, though, you can make mistakes if you're not thoughtful about how you bring your investors on.
Great, thank you. Andrew.
Last thought that we haven't talked much about is what we look for the founder is, one of the questions I mentioned, our 16 questions, is this person committed to a sustained effort for 5+ years? We're working on a piece right now that kind of outlines what makes a great founder, and one of them that kind of gets at that question is commitment to suffering, which is a pretty intense way of saying, do you have the plan, the runway, the fortitude, the passion, the will to do this? And I would say, I don't just say that from an investor's standpoint. I say it from an entrepreneur standpoint because, like I said, we just started this thing, and we're out there raising money. Our paths are more similar than you might think, and we've planned for 5+ years of grinding this out. And we look for teams that are ready to do the same to partner up with.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Let's give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you.